Welcome everyone to The Explainer. Today we are unpacking what is widely expected to be the absolute most seismic financial event of the decade. We're talking about the highly anticipated initial public offering of SpaceX. Now on the surface, this is a phenomenal story about humanity's leap to the stars, but just beneath that surface, there is a really complex web of corporate control that is completely rewriting the rules of how public companies operate. So our goal today is to strip away all that hype and look directly at the facts, the corporate structure, and the massive stakes involved. And speaking of stakes, let's just take a second to wrap our heads around the sheer scale we are dealing with here. Financial projections are currently placing SpaceX's potential valuation anywhere between $1.25 and $1.75 trillion. If it hits the higher end of those estimates, we are quite literally looking at the largest IPO in human history. To put that into perspective for you, this single offering would instantly create a financial ecosystem larger than the GDP of many entire nations. It's going to generate an absolute windfall for Wall Street, Silicon Valley, and of course, founder Elon Musk.
But a number that astronomical really begs a critical question. Is the biggest IPO in history a pure trillion-dollar vision of the future, or is it actually a corporate dictatorship wrapped up in a super cool sci-fi package? Today, we are going to contrast the futuristic hype being championed by visionary investors against some highly unusual corporate realities that already have legal experts sounding the alarms.
Section 1. The trillion-dollar vision. AI, robotics, and space data centers.
So what is actually fueling this massive valuation? Well, to understand it, we have to look past just the rockets. Top-tier investors like Cathie Wood over at ARK Invest, they don't just see a satellite provider. As she puts it, SpaceX is a company fusing robotics, artificial intelligence, and energy storage. The real grand vision here is about building space data centers that will drive the next generation of AI. And they're doing all this while currently holding roughly a 10-year technological lead over competitors like Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin.
This fusion of emerging technologies is exactly what's fueling an absolutely staggering projected growth curve. In 2025, revenues are expected to hit $18.6 billion. By 2027, that number is projected to leap to $50 billion. And looking a little further out, even before the whole space data center concept was fully announced, Cathie Wood projected the company's valuation could reach $2.5 trillion by 2030. It is a compelling story of exponential vertical growth.
But as you might expect, not everyone is buying into the math. And this brings us to a rather harsh dose of financial gravity. David Erickson, an adjunct professor at Columbia Business School and a former Wall Street Equity Co-head, points out a pretty glaring disconnect. If you take a $1.5 trillion valuation and apply it to that $50 billion revenue projection for 2027, you end up with an unprecedented 30 times price-to-sales ratio. Erickson notes that for any company valued over $1 trillion, a multiple this high simply does not exist anywhere else in the market. He argues that Musk is essentially selling a dream of running AI in space because a vision like that is literally required to justify these numbers, much like the bold visions used to drive Tesla stock in the past.
Okay, let's dive into Section 2, Architecture of Absolute Control, diving under the surface of the IPO.
So if investors are going to pay a massive premium for this vision, what exactly are they buying into? Well, it all hinges on a mechanism called supervoting shares. If you, as an everyday outside investor, buy into the IPO, you're going to receive Class A shares. Those give you exactly 1 vote per share. Elon Musk, however, holds Class B shares. These are considered supervoting shares because they carry 10 votes for every single share. This is the exact mechanism that allows founders to take their companies public, take in billions in outside money, but never actually give up the reins. Now, out of the entire pie of shareholder votes, Elon Musk controls a staggering 85%. He owns more than 5.5 billion of these Class B shares, which makes up 94% of that specific class. The absolutely crucial takeaway here is that you might own a piece of the financial upside, but your voice in the company's direction is effectively silenced by design. The offering prospectus states point blank that Musk has the power to control all matters requiring shareholder approval. That includes electing every single director on the board.
Section 3. Hacking corporate governance, rewriting the rules.
Having 85% of the vote is one thing, but how SpaceX actually uses that power is where things get truly unprecedented for anyone considering an investment. First off, there is zero plan for a majority independent board. The board already includes close friends and associates of Musk. Second, they will not use a committee of independent members to determine executive pay. Third, Musk can actually vote using shares he hasn't even officially earned yet. And finally, mandatory arbitration. If you feel defrauded as an investor, you cannot join a class action lawsuit. You are forced into arbitration. Pension fund leaders in California and New York are already highly critical of this, noting that no major U.S. issuer has ever included such a severe restriction for its IPO.
That detail regarding the unearned shares is particularly fascinating. Back in January, Musk was granted a compensation package totaling 1.3 billion restricted shares. Now, at his other company, Tesla, he also has performance-based stock, but he cannot vote with those shares until he actually hits the goals. But at SpaceX, the rules are completely different. He can uniquely vote with these 1.3 billion shares immediately, way before achieving the milestones. Furthermore, because he hasn't technically earned them yet, they aren't taxed, but he can still take out tax-free loans against them as long as his hand-picked board approves it.
And what exactly are the goals he has to hit to officially earn those 1.3 billion shares? The mandate is almost pure sci-fi. The award is legally contingent on establishing a colony on Mars with 1 million inhabitants, alongside launching high-powered data centers into space. So to recap, he is being granted immediate voting power and financial leverage on Earth today in exchange for the promise of colonizing another planet tomorrow.
As you might imagine, the reaction from legal and corporate governance experts has been pretty visceral. Ann Lipton, a law professor at the University of Colorado Boulder, stated outright, "I have never heard of this. He basically found a way to hack the normal rules of corporate organization. It freaks me out." Brian Quinn from Boston College echoed that exact sentiment, calling the January pay package insane. He described the structure as a defensive moat meant to entrench Musk permanently and bluntly warned that it is terrible for shareholders.
Section 4, Visionaries versus Skeptics, the xAI acquisition debate.
So, why does all this absolute control actually matter on a practical level? Because it allows for massive unilateral financial decisions with absolutely zero pushback. And this is perfectly illustrated by SpaceX's big move into artificial intelligence. On one side, you have visionary Cathie Wood defending the acquisition of xAI. She acknowledges the risk but argues it's totally necessary for vertical integration. She even envisions a future where Tesla supplies the chips needed for SpaceX's orbital data centers. But on the other side, skeptic David Erickson is looking strictly at the fundamentals. He views the xAI deal as a vastly overpriced $250 billion acquisition that is actively losing talent. He points out that just recently, there was an alternative AI company available for a fraction of the cost, around $60 billion. Under normal corporate rules, an independent board would heavily scrutinize paying a $250 billion premium. But at SpaceX, that decision rests entirely with one man.
To really understand how anomalous this governance setup is, let's look at a quick comparison. Supervoting shares aren't illegal, right? And they aren't totally unique to SpaceX. Mark Zuckerberg uses them over at Meta to maintain 61% of the voting control. But SpaceX pushes this boundary to the absolute extreme. 85% voting control, no independent compensation committee, and mandatory arbitration. They have effectively dismantled every single standard lever of investor protection.
Which brings us right to our final thought. The SpaceX IPO represents an absolutely unprecedented opportunity to invest in a company that is quite literally trying to change the trajectory of human history. The financial upside could be staggering if those space data centers and Mars colonies actually come to fruition, but the cost of that ticket is absolute compliance. So the question you really have to ask yourself is this: if you buy into the trillion-dollar vision, are you prepared to surrender your voice entirely? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember to always keep questioning the structures behind the numbers. Catch you next time.